On this week's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon, we are featuring a special leader segment with Staples. Today, we are joined by Leigh Pearson. As the Senior Director of Facilities, Sustainability, Sourcing and Procurement for Staples Canada, Leigh leads a diverse team responsible for the facility maintenance, repair, and service-related programs for all Canadian properties, over 320 locations, inclusive of supply chain, retail, corporate, and affiliates. For her efforts, Leigh was named to Canada's 2014 and 2016 Clean 50, which offers recognition to Canada's leaders in sustainability for their contributions over the prior 2 years and has been honored by Retail Council of Canada twice in the area of sustainability. Now let's get into the episode with Leigh.
Hi, welcome to Oakville Staples Studio, where we're going to be recording a session with Leigh Pearson, the Senior Director of Sustainability and Procurement. And we're going to discuss what Staples has been doing in the last 20 years in this field. Leigh, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. And I have to tell you, this studio that you have here at Staples is fantastic. Not only is it going to be helpful in our podcast, in this what we're doing, but I also had a session last week with Tech Canada with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and we all came here and used your studio. So it was fantastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we're looking. It's great. So listen, you're here today because your organization has been doing things on the energy and sustainability front for many years. Yes. Many years. And a lot of people are just starting that journey. And so what we want to do is to speak to you and for you to share with our viewers what is involved, what does it take? Because so many people think, oh, this is way too hard, it's way too expensive, it doesn't make sense. So I'd like, if you could, to share with people that journey. So here's my first question.
Okay.
So is it correct that your organization has been undertaking this journey for 20 years? How many years has?
Oh, at least 20 years. Absolutely.
At least 20 years. So can you sort of explain to me how that started? How did this initiative start, and why are you still doing it? Yeah, if you can.
Sure. So, and I've had the good fortune to be on this journey, on this sustainability journey with Staples for that 20 years. I've actually been with the organization for 26. And long before we coined the phrase sustainability within Staples, we've always been a very responsible organization, one that's committed to being efficient and to really making sure we're taking any sort of non-value added step or waste out of anything we're doing. We like to be responsible and very efficient. And so honestly, that was how we created what we were doing here. It was born out of efficiency. It was tied very closely to our values. And from there, it just evolved. And so certainly with that evolution, we began to phrase it as sustainability, but it's been ingrained in who we are and what we do from the very beginning.
Okay, so I like to pick up on that because that sometimes is a challenge. I think you mentioned a key word. It fits with your values.
It does.
Right? So with your title, and you're a senior person in the organization, how are you making this work? What is it that keeps this going? Because a lot of times people will start something because it becomes the flavor of the month.
Yes.
And then it ends. So can you share with me, based on your journey, because you've been with the organization for some time consistently, how have you made this keep it going? How's that happen?
I think the values are a big piece of that. It has to be aligned to what you do and why you do it, or else it's not authentic. And if it's not authentic, I think that's when things do fizzle out. But the reality is, and when I think about sustainability, it's so big, it's so broad. And what I think we've done exceptionally well is we've looked at who we are, how we show up for our associates, how we show up in our communities, and said, what parts of sustainability does that mean we want to focus on? So we tend to take a bit more narrow of a focus on certain things and look at doing those exceptionally well versus trying to do way too many things and maybe not be successful.
Right. So in your role, can you define basically your role in the sustainability? What do you do, and how how do you manifest this throughout the whole organization?
Well, manifest is a good word because I use that quite often. And I really do believe in the power of positive intention and really being, again, focused on what you want the end state to be. Not that I'm saying I know an end state within sustainability. It's a continuous journey. But again, I would say my role in that, and I'm grateful for it, was the ability to really start some of our programs, to think about how they could evolve, think about not only how it impacts the customer, but how does it impact our associates that need to participate in these, whether by executing them or hopefully by participating in them as a member of our community. So I'd like to say I have the ability to somewhat set the tone for sustainability with a number of other people. Certainly it's not my responsibility alone. We're a large team at Staples, a cross-functional team that's making this happen. But again, I like to hope that I'm that voice, perhaps, in individuals' ear, keeping sustainability alive.
So one of the things that I noticed with your title, because we'll talk to people that have the sustainability title, but that's it. That's their role, which would encompass many things. But you've incorporated procurement, which, by the way, I think is fantastic, because when you're dealing with sustainability, specifically with energy, it's not only how you consume energy, it's actually also how you buy energy. And so how did that happen? Because I don't see that. In fact, can I be candid? Most procurement people don't really, historically, been involved in sustainability. So who had the foresight to see that happen?
Sometimes being early in the journey, as I was back in 20 plus years ago with Staples, and we were starting to create some of these functions, it gave us the ability to design as we go and to be flexible and to be nimble and really look at what made sense for us. And I would say not only was it the connection between sustainability and procurement, honestly, it's the connection to facilities. So if you think about a role or a team like the one I'm part of, if you think about if we decide we'd like to do an LED retrofit, number one, as a facilities team, we're going to deploy that rollout. From a sustainability perspective, we're going to measure it and help contribute. What's the value that creates? And then from a procurement piece, we're able to participate in the selection and the procurement of the material we need to execute the rollout. So it was really about the three things that I felt very strongly early days. There was a lot of synergies between those three functions, and that because of the way the baton gets passed between those groups, if we wanted to be successful, it was important they were closely connected.
So I just want to emphasize, to me, that is best practice, what you've just described, because it's rarely done. So congratulations for you guys for doing that work. What made you start this journey? What personally drove you to do that?
So a couple of things. Again, I started the facilities function, which back in the day was called repair and maintenance. I was the only member of the team at the time, back in 2002, I think. And early into that, we started to explore LED lighting and building automation systems. And as I started to do the due diligence on the building automation systems, it became clear that there was an environmental benefit to doing that. And I would say that was the first, pardon the pun, light bulb moment. I would say the second was becoming a parent. And, having my daughter really motivated me to really, really pursue this quite, I would say, passionately within Staples and really think about how we could continue to drive positive change in Canada.
So you were a champion right from the get-go, based on what I'm hearing. How did you, because senior management and the executive have to be on board, how did you get them on board with this whole piece and continue to keep them on board?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, again, these are very intelligent individuals who also are very supportive of best practices and efficiency and are also very committed to being good stewards of our communities. That's palpable within Staples, is our commitment to community. And honestly, it's been unwavering. And so with that, I think it already opened the dialogue. I would say the other piece is there is an element, if you're in a role like mine, of persistence, of which I happily take on that role. So I think it's a combination of keeping the dialogue going. But again, I would say it's embedded into the DNA of who we are, leadership, associate level, everyone.
I'm reading a book that was published in 2008. It's called Green to Gold. And basically, they're describing wave runners. These are companies that are thinking ahead all the time, and they're always ahead of the game. I think what you're describing to me is Staples Canada is actually one of those wave runners. It's not, this is new to you. You've been thinking that way for a while. So I think it's in your, like what you described, in your DNA.
It is. Like
yeah.
it's again, and so I would say this to whoever I was speaking with. I've been here for 26 years. That is also part of why I'm here, is that there is a very strong connection for me personally. My values, the company's values, and again, the way we show up and deliver sustainable change it's paramount to what gives me purpose in terms of what we're doing here. And I would say it's part of those shared values.
Okay, now this is a question because I've worked with many organizations and there's leaders like you that play a significant role. But sometimes when they leave, they retire or they go on, sometimes it drops off. What, and I expect, you will be with Staples till the time you decide not to be, but how, let's say you left, how is this going to continue with Staples? Like, can you share what you're doing to ensure that actually is done?
Yeah, I think a big piece is making things relatable. So again, very daunting category. And if we talk about energy as an example, a lot of data, very data intense, a lot of spreadsheets, which, no offense to anyone who loves them, but can cause some to glaze over.
Sure.
It's not, it doesn't necessarily resonate. So what I would say is important to me in order to sustain it if I were not here would be to make it relatable to individuals, to put it into terms that make sense to you, not only from a business perspective, but make sense to you as a human being who lives in a home, whether you own it or rent it or drives a vehicle or whatever you do. How do we take what we're doing and make it into bite-sized pieces of information, and people can say, you know what, I can make a difference. And when I think about recycling, I'll use that example of something like a battery. Our goal is to say, I know it's just one battery, but it does make a difference. Bring it to a Staples location, or give it back to one of your drivers if it's a program we support on our fleet. You're making a difference by doing that. I don't want people to walk away thinking, it's just one small thing. It doesn't matter if I do it or not. And I think if we can continue to create that excitement and that sense of, I can do this, I can contribute, I can be part of the solution here, that's how it carries on.
Fair enough. So there's a few things to unpack there. You mentioned earlier the communication, that you've got to continually communicate the merit and the value so people understand it.
Yeah.
You have to have data to make sure that data is there to verify what you're doing and the actions they're taking. And then you've got to embed this in the culture so people are excited, right?
Absolutely.
Did I summarize?
You did.
Basically what?
Yes.
So that's really very critical.
It is. I often have said, data is where you start. You have to know, because the reality is, for every organization, based on your values and based on your data set, what you go after first might look different.
Yes.
What made sense for Staples and our journey doesn't mean it necessarily makes sense for the next organization. You have to understand your organization, your operation, and the data, again, will help lead you. And we have been tracking utility data, again, maybe not quite as in detail for the 20 years, but certainly 15.
Yes.
We have so much information. It allows us to really understand where are the locations we should make certain changes. How does that impact lighting, building automation, the HVAC we specify, et cetera? So start there. But the other piece is, I've always said, have a little fun along the way. Again, I don't want to be foreboding with this all of the time. It has to be something that you can bring people along, people can think about the impact, but also think about how it connects, again, to the mission of the organization as a whole.
So can you share examples of what you do? Like, how do you share successes or promote that type of activity within Staples? Can you share with us?
So we have a dashboard that we have created. We also then take that and we have quarterly updates that we send out. Big fan of infographics. Again, taking data, putting it into relatable pieces. Sometimes that's visual, sometimes that's text or data, sometimes it's a combo of all three. So we have a cumulative report on our goals to 25. We have our quarterly progress. We have our dashboard. And we've been doing a lot of work with our team on our webpage and having a dynamic page on, whether it's .ca or Staples Professional that speaks to our commitments from a sustainability perspective.
And is that information made available to whom? Where is this information shared?
Sure. So the quarterly and cumulative are internal, shared internally.
Throughout the whole organization or selective?
It's selective right now,
Yeah.
what I would say, and not because it couldn't go broader, it has to. Again, we need to be mindful of the amount of information that we're giving people. So
yes, absolutely.
Sometimes how it cascades can be more impactful.
Right.
So that I would say the webpage is very much public.
Right.
Our CSR report, very much public, which again, we're working on the next iteration of that right now, which will contain a number of pieces around our commitments to sustainability and our results and some of the things we've been working on.
Okay, now you've mentioned some magic words. Data is really important, and you completely share that, our experience with clients. That's really very critical, and that's a challenge for a lot of clients, as you just described, like spreadsheets galore, trying to get information from utility bills. It can be really mind-boggling and time-consuming. The question I want to ask you is, because you're enhancing the knowledge base, what type of training are you doing? Are you doing training with people in the organization on sustainability, or how do you do that, if you can share?
Yeah, I would say we do things where we can create awareness.
Okay.
So if we have opportunities, we're in a lovely Staples studio right now, which of course they also have spotlight capabilities where we can bring individuals together for education sessions. We replicate those types of activities in our home office as well, where we can do different activities. Again, try to integrate a little bit of fun into that.
Yes.
So whether it's a lunch and learn, or sometimes we're actually creating something. We recently had an activity where individuals created a piece of art that now hangs in our office made out of recycled writing instruments, which is a program we're very proud to operate nationally across Canada. So we try to do it in different ways, I would say.
Okay, so that's really important. And I want to reinforce this, like you have this auditorium that is so slick to have presentations. So I could see it for whether it's your people or other organizations using it would be fantastic.
It is.
So Leigh, you've talked about this team, and again, you're hitting a kind of a best practice. So can I tell you, most organizations historically have thought it's a one person or one department that manages this thing. You're kind of music to my ears that you have a team and a team approach. Can you share with our audience, what does that mean? Who's involved in the team?
Sure.
And how did you kind of formulate that, if you could?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Team is really important to me. It's important in Staples, of course, but it's important to me personally. I'll be the first person to admit what I don't know. I came into this, quite candidly, joining Staples on the journey to being, the store operations path is where I was headed. And this opportunity, sort of presented itself, and I'm thankful that it did. But again, did I anticipate, if someone would have asked me, 26 years ago, where do you think you'll be? Did I think it would be facilities and sustainability and sourcing and procurement? No, not necessarily. And so I'm a big advocate for being very transparent about what I don't know, about things that I think I can create value in, and part of that is building the right team.
Yes.
And building the right team of experts and having skills that are complementary to each other, but also where we can have good dialogue about where do we go next.
Right.
And so the energy team is an interesting one, because when I think about the working groups within sustainability, and that's what we call them, is working groups, if we have one on communications, one on, let's say, recycling solutions, we have, again, energy, We're working on one for products and packaging and sustainable procurement. When I think about energy, it's one of the first ones that we got up and running because, again, it was probably the area I felt I knew the least about from a commodity perspective and things of that nature. And so our team is actually built up of partners.
Right.
Of external partners.
That's fantastic.
And
external.
Yes, they're external partners. And when we are together as one team, working to figure out how Staples can be more efficient. And that's the goal. And so we have partners that assist with the utility bill verification.
Right.
Because certainly there's some opportunities there.
For sure.
Even if you're on, EFT, PAP, what have you, there's still some opportunity within that bill analysis.
Absolutely.
Making sure you're in the right rate class, et cetera. So anyways, we have someone doing that, and that's also how we benchmark everything.
Yes.
We take the bill data, and then we accommodate for things like weather and estimated bills, et cetera. Then we have a team who is handling really the building automation, taking all the hot, cold calls. Again, when I think about the team and the structure and how we're there to serve the needs of all of our sites, from retail to supply chain to corporate, whether any facility requirement, the last thing I want to do also is having team members focused on hot, cold calls.
Right.
So we have a third party that supports us on building automation. They're engineers within that space, so they're quite fluent in it, but also can address those hot, cold calls and can really analyze, okay, do we need to look at our dampers? What's going on outside? Things like that. And so that's really helpful as well. So it's always been how we've done it. We've put it together and just brought together the right experts that we think can be very helpful. And then the third group is really around commodities.
So it's fascinating, by the way. And how long has this team been together?
This team has been together for 16 years.
That's a ding, ding, ding
Again,
award.
I say that because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, a lot of this sort of ties to around the time I had my daughter. So that's how I know the age of the Energy Committee, because it's in line with really her age. So
Got it. And frequency, how often do you meet as a team or communicate with each other?
So there's monthly conversations.
Okay.
And at times there's been more.
Yeah.
At times there's been less. Again, it was the foundation for how we built the dashboard.
Yes.
Right? So everybody contributes to that dashboard. It's not just site performance on a consumption basis. It's also tracking our retrofits if we're doing them, and are they performing the way that we thought they would. It's tracking our EV, which I'm very excited about.
We're going to get into
yeah,
that.
I know. I figured we would.
Yes.
So it tracks those as well. But really, the point of the dashboard is to be this combination of all of the things we're doing for sustainability. So it's tracking recycling data as well.
Yep.
But from an energy perspective, those three parties all provide different inputs.
Okay. Okay, so that's fantastic. For 16 years, too. So I'm going to touch upon this, and you'll let me know if there's things that you can or can't discuss. So do you establish targets, and I'm going to dwell on energy if I could.
Of course.
And we'll come back to why I'm dwelling on energy. But do you set, can you share with the targets that you've laid out and how you've established those targets?
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about our targets, too, and sometimes when you see things posted publicly and some are quite declarative about fairly large decreases in consumption, what was interesting for us is we went after some of that 16 years ago.
Yes.
So some of our bigger drops in consumption actually came years and years ago when we deployed building automation, when we first started changing from T12 to T8 to T5, on our lighting journey, and now, of course, LED. And so it's interesting because sometimes you have to level set that with individuals when they say, well, you could get X amount of savings. You can if you've done nothing.
Yes.
And I'm not saying there's not more to be had. There always is. So we do. Right now we're looking, and we're on track, 10% reduction in our consumption, natural gas and electricity, from a baseline of, which is a 3-year average.
Yep.
Which is how we do it.
And baseline is what year?
We did 2017, 18, 19.
Okay. So
and the reason being, we also need to factor in pandemic.
Yep. Agree.
right? So I'm not
Excuse it a bit.
right. We don't want to use that as any type of cushion for us in our performance,
Yeah.
energy-wise.
Yeah.
And so we've gone pre-pandemic on that, and that's the goal again, because we've already addressed some of that what I'll call low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
Through some of our earlier work.
Okay, so let's you've hit a special topic on. So we talk about low-hanging fruit, and it's great that you go after it. But the fact is, you've been doing this for 20 years. So I want to tell our audience, because most don't actually appreciate this, that low-hanging fruit will grow back unless you have constant process
absolutely.
in place.
Yes.
And so I'll share with you, like we have worked with organizations, they go, okay, we've done the low-hanging fruit, we're done. I'm going,
no.
can you
Constant
share,
commissioning.
please explain, if you could.
I would.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So part of the group I mentioned that supports us with the hot cold calls, part of that is constant commissioning.
Sure.
So as an example, we did a project where we tied lighting controls to occupancy input. Because inherently, if you say to someone, tell us what time your light should come on, they're going to pick a time that gives themselves a bit of a buffer.
Cushion,
That's
yes.
Human nature.
It's
You would
nature.
do it in your own home.
Yes.
The reality is, if you tie it more so to things like occupancy, it's actually just in time. It's
Yes.
just when you need it. And that project was very successful for us. Sometimes we're talking about minutes, but minutes in kilowatts start to add up. And the thing is, though, you're right. We could have walked away from that and said, wow,
done.
that was good. We've done it. But we actually go back and verify that we're still connected that way in every site.
Well, and if I could add, the reason
Sure.
there's real value to that, because a couple things happen. Your operation will change in some fashion.
100%.
Like, for example, this store that I know of before, now you have a studio.
Yes, exactly.
It's changed, right?
Yeah.
So the operation changes, so conditions change. Markets, energy markets
Yes.
change. So what you did before also has, and then the other thing, which it sounds that's not an issue with you, is you have personnel changes, and so the people that knew stuff before don't know. So this continuous improvement process.
It's so important, or set points get adjusted. Again, maybe you're doing work in a site and we need to adjust for that. Again, we need to make sure we go back and set it back to our established settings. So we have established settings for heat, for cool, for daytime or operating hours, night setbacks, etc. We know our damper positions and how we want to leverage fresh air intake. But again, we do need to consistently go back. And part of that monthly that I was telling you is we will get then a list of every site that has what we'll call a MODCOM loss, where part of the system is not telling us what we need it to anymore,
Right.
and or where they've deviated from the parameters that have been set forth.
Right.
That's how we've been able to continue to maintain where we want to be, but also to continue to see reductions in our consumption.
That's fantastic. I hope our audience is listening to that. This is a continuous process. And
Absolutely it is.
now, if you could, because everything, like, from my perspective, things are done because there's good business reasons.
Yes.
I understand societal, you're doing things for your daughter, get it, I understand. But effectively, has this been determined by the corporation that this is just a good business decision? Like,
Absolutely.
Is that what is always
Yeah, I mean,
checked
I
and
think
measured?
again, and you and I chatted, whether it was during this podcast or not, about the fact that so many see utilities as an uncontrollable.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think that's how we always see it. We know there are different things we can do. We have automation in our locations. We can leverage that. We can make sure that we're maintaining certain systems. We have the choice to look at LED in our store. So I think absolutely there's the sense that this is good business.
So, Leigh, over the past 20 years that you've been doing this, what would you say is the biggest achievement that you and your team and Staples has done in the last 20 years? What do you think? What would you, if you could put it down to one thing, what would be the biggest? It's a big question.
That is very big.
I
It's
know.
a very big question. I'm proud that we've continued to keep this going. I'm proud of our commitment, which we haven't even really gotten into, on renewables, our commitment there, and sustaining that commitment, and really, like, we're behind that, what we do in our partnership with Bullfrog. And I would say it's really the fact that we have stayed true to what we said we were going to do early days of our commitments to, we'll say, energy in this
Yeah.
context.
Yes.
We've stayed very true to that. We've been transparent in terms of reporting the data. And I think, and not that, the audience can see it, but the data we've created, I'm proud of how we've made that come to life in a way that I think if we were to ask individuals within Staples, there is an awareness of our commitment to being energy efficient. And so I'm proud we've been able to do that in the midst of everything else going on in people's lives and in the world around us.
And think about this, today is kind of more trending to do this work, but you guys started it 20 years ago. Like you were way ahead of the curve, and you said you're still doing it, and you're continually changing and modifying.
Yeah.
I think that is a big accomplishment.
Thank you.
So I'm ending this conversation, but my question to you, and we have covered quite a gamut, by the way, what do you think, based on what we've discussed, what do you think is the biggest takeaway the audience should glean based on what you've discussed today? If you could share based on what you think.
Understand your company, your organization, whether you're a small business, you're a large enterprise, understand what matters to you. Who are you? Why are you doing this to begin with? And then understand, how do you create programs that support and live the values of your organization?
Well stated.
It's important.
Well stated.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Leigh. I really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to our next session.
Wonderful. Thank you.